Oh, yeah. For those of you people that are watching this blue-white breakdown video, that is indeed Dustin Hockensmith joining me on this one. It's July 19th as we tape it, around 1 o'clock. It is pretty warm out, but I'm not mad about it. I'm Bob Flounders. Dustin, it's good to see you. We talked about a month ago, I think, give or take a podcast or two, but it's good to see you. And Big Ten Media Days next week, which means it's really, really close to the start of very much anticipated 2023 Penn State season. I promised Dustin that I would look as disheveled as possible for this podcast. Before we got on the air, he told me I succeeded. So, Dustin, how are you doing?
Well, I also said I'm as disheveled as you. However,
you're just trying. It's a salute to me. That's all you're doing. It's a tribute.
Yeah.
Salute. That's
well,
all.
And I got a little help by an eight-month-old who seems to be allergic to sleep. So, so yeah, I got that going for me. But I think anybody who's watching this, like, this is your own fault if you are seeing the two of us and not just hearing us.
Yeah,
that's a double whammy.
Yeah. Dustin, are you a caffeine guy? You mentioned lack of sleep. Is that something that's a big part of your life? Okay. Has he just up a Dunkin' Donuts coffee?
The guzzling has begun. I'd say that's pretty accurate. Absolutely. There's no other way at a certain point. And let me say this about Big Ten Media Days, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know how much fan interest there really is sometimes in that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. However, kind of like the blue-white game serves a purpose beyond football, I think Big Ten Media Days serve a purpose of just as a forewarning and people getting into content mode. Like, this is the first stage, I think, of the real countdown to the season.
Yeah. And also, I'm glad in years past when Penn State hasn't been like as deep as it is now, it was kind of a mixed bag. They were all great, really good guys to talk to. Kind of a mixed bag of the Penn State players that James Franklin would bring either to Indianapolis or before at Chicago. But this year, and he feels strongly they're always going to be veteran players, and I can understand that. But the guys that are coming to Penn State that'll be made available for extended periods of time. Adisa Isaac, the defensive end, who's definitely a rising player. Olu Fashanu, the left tackle, who looks the part of a first rounder unless something goes, horribly wrong. Keaton Ellis, I think, is not quite maybe the player right now that those two are, but he's at a position where he can speak to a lot of things going on in Manny Diaz's defense, and I think that's a value, because sometimes the players that they're not going to give up house secrets, Dustin, but they will go into some. You can learn some things from a guy like Keaton Ellis, and you're right. There's not going to be a ton of information, but James is going to be available for the better part, because there's a couple different media sessions, for the better part of it, like an hour and a half next week, and he will let some things slip either on purpose or not. That'll be, I think, pretty interesting. But you're right. It is more about the marking of the calendar that, hey, we're in late July, practice is a couple weeks away, and West Virginia September 2nd it's really going to happen. So I think you're right. I'm looking forward to it. Johnny's going to be out there with me, PennLive readers and watchers. So we're excited, and I know that if you're working next week, I'm sure you'll be able to do some things off of it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too. Like, sometimes you just never know how Jim Harbaugh is going to behave or what Ryan Day is going to say maybe about Penn State's offensive line, whatever. I mean, there could be some stuff out there that is of interest to people. And I do agree with you that, and it's good when there's a crossroads of like leaders who are also impact players at Penn State. So you get impact players who make that trip and can speak with them. But James Franklin, how many times do you think James Franklin has let things slip not on purpose? Like, he's the most purposeful guy there is, but there are some times where he gets wound up and lets something slip.
I would say of the things he has let slip during his 10 years in State College, if he's let's say in 10 years he's let 50 things slip either on purpose or not on purpose, because you're right, he is very much of a guy that does things by design. I would say 10%. maybe 5 things during his.
Yeah.
There's always that chance that something will come out. But you're right. More often than not, when he wants, it's more like it's not. I guess letting it slip is not the right. Revealing, I think, would be how I would describe it, because it is definitely usually it's not an accident, but every once in a while you get something you're like. Dustin, it'll usually come up when he will confirm something about whether a report about is a player still on the team, is a player going to miss a couple of games. That is something that he sometimes answers that differently, but every once in a while he'll give you a direct answer.
Yeah. What would be the number one thing that you would want him to confirm or let slip or reveal? You know, what's one thing of interest that's hanging out there? And I don't really think like position battles, he will never really get into
I don't
those.
think he's going to name his starting quarterback next week. You're right.
Right.
You're
that drama will continue.
Yeah. I mean, to me, going into the season, unless there's a surprise disciplinary action that we don't know about, I think just an update. I don't think the penalty will be very harsh. Theo Johnson is a guy that had an off-field issue. It did not. I mean, I don't want to downgrade it, because I think there was some violence attached to a little bit of violence attached to the issue. But just to clarify, where he is, maybe going into August practices. Sometimes the suspension it's handled over the summer. Sometimes it'll be handled early in the first game. But just to me, that would be probably the one thing that jumps out to me as far as,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I would say that's it. But Dustin, that kind of leads me into, I wanted to get your feel for, I was thinking of, as we sit here now before August practice, I was thinking about some of, since the offseason began after the Rose Bowl, what are like really the biggest storylines or the biggest stories that have transpired, in the last, I guess it would be 6 or 7 months. And I was going to throw three things that struck me. Maybe you have another one, but if you could kind of speak in your mind the importance of these storylines. So the first one really that stood out to me was James Franklin's, I want to say it was abrupt. Maybe it was not that abrupt and it had been building. James Franklin moving on from Taylor Stubblefield shortly after the Rose Bowl, and installing Marcus Higgins as the wide receivers coach. And then immediately, like right after that became known, they were able to add a couple of players in the transfer portal at the wideout position. Dante Cephas, I think the Kent State player, would be one of them. But that happened. That I don't want to say it came out of the blue, because I don't think James Franklin really is an out of the blue kind of guy. I think that was clearly been building. I think Dave Jones actually talked though to Stubblefield, and he said it caught him by surprise. To me, I don't believe that anything really catches James Franklin by surprise, but the decision that he made, how quickly it happened, what happened right after that. Malik McClain, the Florida State wideout, I think also is the other guy that came aboard. I think he also came aboard shortly after this decision. But in terms of that moment, how big of an impact do you think that was in the offseason?
Well, I think the great impact is still to be determined, right? It's just, there are about a dozen guys who I don't know what the next step is for them in their development. Yeah. And maybe it was building for a while. I thought it was pretty telling whenever it was this offseason when James Franklin really went out of his way to describe how impactful the wide receiver position can be and should be. And I think it was connected to this. There was just dissatisfaction with how impactful they actually were. And, to move on from Taylor Stubblefield really kind of suggests, I think, to me, some kind of philosophical divide, whether that's about how much recruiting is in the job, what type of player they're recruiting, or, the performance to date, how to evaluate guys. There's something there that they just probably didn't see eye to eye about, and that maybe James Franklin realized they probably were never going to see eye to eye about that. So Marcus Higgins, I mean, I feel like I just don't know a ton about whether he he can develop these guys, whether he can't. The timing is interesting because Dante Cephas, I think I think before they even hired Higgins, right, committed. He committed without a wide receivers coach publicly, I guess would be one way to say it. So, yeah, I think this is going to be fascinating to see who emerges from this group. Can Keandre Lambert-Smith have a career year? That's a big question for the offense in general. Is Trey Wallace, can he take a pretty explosive next step? That's another key question for the whole offense. And then who else is it? Amari Evans, Caden Saunders. There's a bunch of guys who are in similar growth trajectories where they just haven't done it yet. But I think to really answer that question, it's just about performance this fall. And Cephas is part of that. Malik McLean is part of that. But they got to get a lot more, I think, out of these wide receivers. And, I think the wide receivers that they got committed is part of this story too. Tysier Denmark is a big one. Josiah White is a big one. So this is, what are those guys like more talented than the current guys? I don't really know. I mean, there's just a lot of things that remain unanswered about this, but clearly there was just a situation where Stubblefield and Franklin weren't in lockstep on the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think your point about when James went out again, nothing he does is by accident. He kind of really went into detail because it was almost like he'll always say like, I don't really want to talk about what went into the decision to get rid of somebody. He's done that before, but then he'll completely address the position and why he needed to be better. And it's really, really not that hard to see that he's basically answered your question without really specifically looping in the guy that he got rid of. To me, it always starts with recruiting with James Franklin. And that's not just high school kids anymore. It's also the transfer portal. I mean, if you're going to be a good recruiter for him, it doesn't end when you sign when you sign a class and you get on to the next class. You have to really you have to be aware of what's going on in the transfer portal, and if there's a guy that James thinks that they can get and you don't get him, it's just not going to go well for you. I can't really, they have had some good wide receivers. I think Jahan Dotson, during Stubblefield's time certainly got better. So did Parker. So I don't know how much of it was once they got here. Was he really upset with how they were being coached? But really, I think James is a big picture guy, and I think it's all about. It's about getting them there and then developing them. But if you don't get them there, you can't develop them. So I think there might have been more than I think James was more in that tersely worded statement. He was more than a little upset, I think, with Stubblefield. So anyway, I just thought that was significant. I got two more for you.
Yeah.
Since this is a little bit more, I think, into your wheelhouse. Just the guys, the recruiting success they've had in this 2024 class since the Rose Bowl. I know they had a couple of very early commitments from PA, but when you look at the class and who they've gotten and how it kind of stacks up, I just looked at Lions 247. I think it's either 10 or 11 4-stars, in the class with room and a couple of, who knows, by the time a couple 3-stars could be 4-stars. And I would fold into that specifically the Gruckenmeyer identification, and then he has the really good showing at Elite 11. But just in the last half a year, the growth, I think, from Penn State in terms of recruiting this class, and also, I think there's more eyes on how James and his staff actually quickly identify players that are going to be really good in terms of recruiting services. And maybe because Gruckenmeyer went from, I think, a 3-star to a 4-star, but you look at the names he's been able to add, and they're not, a lot of them aren't just 4-stars or high 4-stars, going into Wisconsin and getting 2 really good players. Just that storyline for you.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing they've earned some trust and patience with, it's with the way that they evaluate prospects, especially their early evaluations and what they're looking for. And I made this point on another show earlier is, I think the qualities that they're looking for in players, the tangible things, the intangible, whatever it is that their checklist is high on that checklist. I think they've gotten much better at identifying those things. Specifically over the last 5 years, I think has evolved and gotten better physical attributes, because their early evaluations of guys have so often proven correct. And there's not just Grunkemeyer in this class,
Right.
Drew Aller in the last class was part of it. But I think Luke Reynolds, the tight end from Connecticut, is a top 50 player on 24/7 Sports, and he was a low 3-star because he just didn't have a lot of experience at the position that he was about to play. It's kind of like Tyler Warren a few years back, and that's worked out pretty well. But this class has a lot of interesting talent in it, and I would include. Like Donovan Harbor is one of those guys from Wisconsin you mentioned. He has the biggest shoulders I've ever seen. Like, he just looks like a very, very natural interior offensive lineman. Now, whether that translates to success early in his career or whatever, we'll see. Malachi Williams from Drexel Hill, PA. He's a 4-star in a composite sense, but there are some mixed reviews about how good he is and how good he can be. Like, I think On3 has him as a top 150 or top 200 player in the country. He is very, very explosive. Needs to get a little bit bigger at 6'3", 215. So there's still a lot of potential for him to grow and climb the rankings, I think. And I think Garrett Sexton, the offensive tackle from Wisconsin, On3 has him as a top 50 player in the country overall. Yeah. So, he's listed, on 24/7 Sports as 6'7", 245 pounds. I'm approximately 6 foot, 235 pounds just for comparison's sake. I think I need to work on, not my base is okay, but it's the middle portion of my body that is really a struggle. But Garrett Sexton, if that evaluation is correct, that can change the outlook about the offensive tackle position, which I still have questions about. So there's not only, some impact players, and I think to go without talking about Quentin Martin as an impact player, you can't do that because he is such an interesting player. 6 foot, 210 pounds. He looks like a very legitimate prospect at both running back and wide receiver. So it's what can Mike Yurcich do with this guy? Not only is he really talented, he also plays sort of a futuristic position on the offensive side. So there's, the 2022 class, the class that just made such a big impact, set the bar really, really high. And I think there are some real aces in the 23 class, the Tony Rojas, Javen Williams, Tamir Robinson, that group of guys. The 24 class has, it looks to me like 6 or 8 really legitimate, impactful type players down the road. Yeah.
And one more thing about the recruiting, Dustin, I think, I'll be honest, I wasn't really sure. I wasn't really sure at the end of the 2021 season about Phil Troutwine, as a guy that, recruiting and development, as a guy that maybe could do both, because 2021 did not end well for the offensive line. They just struggled against, and I think that the strides that they made on the field, on the practice field, and also the players that they've added in the last couple of classes, and including the 2024 class as offensive linemen, I really think that's probably another deserving storyline within the recruiting storyline, that it feels like they've got whatever was going wrong, they've got it fixed. Now, 2023 is going to be a referendum, I think, on just how far this offensive line, I think, has really come, because they close strong, but they're going to be playing some games this year against some good defenses that, with a young quarterback, they're going to need their offensive line probably to play even a little better. But I think Phil Troutwine is another. I've been very impressed by him, since the end of the 2021 season, and I know that is something. I think that if Penn State had not kind of gotten better at recruiting and developing offensive linemen, no one would be talking about them as a potential top 5 team this year. And I think Phil Troutwine, with James Franklin's help, and I know that they've made some additions around him, I think that's another really, really key part of why this team, I think, is really in a good spot. Dustin, we're talking about storylines of the offseason here on the Blue White Breakdown. We're already 20 minutes in. Time always flies with you.
I know it does.
If you need to get more caffeine, you can. But I had one more storyline for you, you already touched upon it, but I just think that what happened with some first and second year players during spring practice, um, where they've Penn State obviously liked these kids, whether they were in the 2022 class or whether they were January enrollees in 2023. And it feels to me, and just watching them, especially in the blue white game, it feels to me like for the second year in a row, you are going to see some first year players and some second year players make really big contributions on a team that's got a pretty good base of third and fourth year players. And that's another reason why I think Penn State has really positioned itself not just for this year, but for the next couple of years to be, especially when they expand the playoff, Dustin, they're going to be in the conversation for a long time. But Tony Rojas, what he was able to do off the field, then on the field, Kevin Winston at safety when you're trying to replace a guy like Jair Brown, and they already like a bunch of their safeties. I know that some of these January enrollee offensive linemen, I don't think they're afraid to play them if they need to, much like they did with Drew Shelton. They might want to redshirt him, but I don't think they would hesitate to get them more than 4 games this season if an injury came up. And the guy that I am definitely all in on this year, and I know that I'm not alone. I didn't start the bandwagon, but I just know that Dennis Sutton is going to be a guy that when you talk about a player that has the potential to do something, and just kind of maybe when Nassib was his last year when he became an All-American, he was a veteran. When Etor Gross-Matos went from his true freshman season of not in the rotation to being a breakout player, that's kind of what I kind of see for Denai, and he's going to do it with 2 potential, high draft picks. I don't know if they're going to be in front of him because they're all going to play a lot, but that defensive end room is so exciting. I just think when they came out of spring with these guys playing like the way that they did, to me, it's a sign that this is his best team on paper, and it's clearly to me his deepest.
Yeah, and I think that depth, especially on defense, can be utilized so well. You can run so deep and do different things. And Manny Diaz has no shortage of tools at his disposal to disrupt offenses, and he can do it in a variety of ways as he's proven. I think just in general, if you want to combat the transfer portal and the problems that it can create in your program, a fearlessness to play freshmen is a really good starting point for that, right? Like to get these guys involved early. I think it helps recruiting too. Like if national recruits are seeing, if you deserve it, you'll get it, which Penn State I think has shown, then you're more inclined to go to that place. And I think they were fortunate to get a lot of guys, maybe even more than they anticipated, in such a good position to play year one last year. I think there's a good group of guys who are ready this year, as you mentioned. Tony Rojas and Tamir Robinson are 2 players who might just force the issue. Like they might be too good to avoid that. And the linebacker position doesn't necessarily need numbers per se, but if you can get an impact player on the field, you got to do it. And I think to your point about Dennis Sutton too, like if you have 3 like high draft pick edge rushers, you use 3 high pick edge rushers. Like who cares what the starting designation is? It doesn't really matter. I think Dennis Sutton is in position to have a monster year. And then, one thing that really like the last time we talked, I expressed a little bit of skepticism or concern or whatever about the depth at cornerback. And you were like, look, if they didn't feel comfortable with these young guys that we haven't seen yet, Storm Duck probably doesn't leave after 5 minutes on campus. So to me, that thinking really got to me because I didn't really find myself thinking in that way, but I think that's valid. And it's like, Elliot Washington is a primary candidate to jump out there. And at the safety spot, like King Mack is incredibly talented and incredibly athletic, and he's super fast. I mean, why wouldn't you use that in year one in some variety, some way or another? Tight end will be interesting too, because I think the kid they got, Andrew Rapouille, is a legitimate prospect and a legitimate player in year one. Now that he's up to 253 pounds on the roster. That third job isn't by any means won. So you could see a little bit of a surprise there too. So I don't know if they'll make the same level of impact as a freshman did last year, but I think it's going to be pretty close.
Yeah, Dustin, I think you, at least for me, you kind of inadvertently got into maybe one quick fourth storyline I want to mention before we wrap up the blue white breakdown, and that is Penn State getting its ducks in a row in terms of NIL, whether it's former players kind of helping James Franklin out, and you got these groups kind of coming together to. You mentioned it's great to play freshmen and have them be burst out players, but if you want to keep them for their sophomore and junior years, you have to have a plan in place to keep to that's just the way that they need financial assistance and they deserve to be rewarded. And as Franklin's referenced it, that they were behind a couple years ago, and they're probably still behind, but they are definitely, I think, on the right track with rewarding the young players who develop quickly, help the program, produce some wins, get them in the top 10 picture. And it feels like there's a lot of former players that are also kind of helping James. And I think it's a great sign how this has kind of come together. And I think it will only get stronger and stronger as they continue to win games, because they're really trying to get everyone involved when it comes to the alumni base. And I think they'll get more and more excited the more this team wins. But I do think pretty significant strides, Dustin, I think, when it comes to the NIL collectives and former players that fans know about, saying, hey, this is what we got to do. James is right. And I think everyone they're kind of in lockstep, and I think that needed to happen.
Yeah, I think rowing the boat in the same direction was huge. You can't really have two big collectives working against each other and competing against each other. So the fact that those guys came together as Happy Valley United probably is a good thing. Probably isn't a coincidence given the timing. Yeah. And I think you're seeing this is what NIL is. Like it's kind of like the boogeyman in college football, because you hear so many stories about, they're going to give this quarterback $7 million to sign as a freshman, and maybe that stuff is going to go on here and there long term. But the reality of it is you have to give these guys a really fruitful situation to connect them with businesses and connect them with realistic opportunities to make money. And I think that's where it seems they made a lot of strides, is everybody getting those businesses and the alumni together and not just handing out sacks of cash, but giving players opportunities to earn those stacks of cash. I think that long term is what NIL really is, not this, not the worst case scenarios that everybody kind of wants to paint it to be.
Yeah. Dustin, I just want to say this might have been your most amazing appearance on the Blue White Breakdown, at least
not
with
physically.
Me.
Not physically.
No,
but
I think that people need to see you for who you really, really are. They already know who I really, really am, and it's probably not a compliment that I said that about myself. But I do think we make a good team when it comes to breaking down some stuff, especially in the summer when it seems like it's slow, but it's really not slow. I thought we covered a lot of pretty good ground today. I think this isn't the last of you and I doing blue white breakdowns, but I know you're a busy guy. I know you're a busy guy, so we'll let you go. But thanks so much, guys. Johnny McGonigal and I will be in Indianapolis next week for Big Ten Media Days. I think Penn State is going to. The Penn State contingent will speak Wednesday, so we'll be there for that. Check out everything, all of Dustin's recruiting stuff on PennLive. You can check out. I have a series going about the most intriguing players for 2023. I think I'm 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 deep. My brain's always going. I don't know who's going to be next on the list, but all I can tell you is going to be really intriguing.
Stay tuned.